The following presentation is brought to you by the Realm Network.
Hello and welcome to Taskmaster Talk with Kevin Sullivan. I am your host, JP John Paz from the two-man power trip of wrestling. Of course, joining me is the star of the show, the man that was the former WCW and ECW World Tag Team Champion. He was an NWA Florida Heavyweight Champion. He was the mind behind the NWO and the booker of WCW during its most successful period. He is, of course, the Taskmaster, the Games Master, the devil himself, Mr. Kevin Sullivan. Kevin, how you doing today, sir?
Doing great, John. How are you, my friend?
Not doing too bad. I feel like the world has kind of gone a little crazy out there. It's definitely a little nuts, but not doing too bad despite all that.
Yeah, we've had a big windstorm out here, so we're without power. So I told you I may lose the phone too, but we'll fight through it.
Yes. Now, out there, is that like a normalcy? Do you guys get a lot of storms and stuff?
Yeah, we get one about once a year. Usually the power's only out for an hour or two. I've been out here when I first moved out here. We're out without power for a week, which was brutal. I've been trying to put in a generator for 10 years and I don't do it, but I need to.
Yeah, it seems like obviously an island out there, but it seems like that could happen at any time.
Yeah, and the thing is, we have these gigantic trees. You know what I mean? Gigantic trees, and the electrical. They should be underground. It should have been that way from the very beginning, or when they could have done it. But the wires get knocked down, and right now, not just us, but all the islands are down, and part of the mainland. So there's 500,000 houses without electricity.
Now, as far as today's episode and what I wanted to talk about today was WCW Sold Out 2000. This was a pay-per-view, obviously, back in 2000. But when I say Sold Out 2000, what's kind of the first thing that pops in your mind?
That we were going to go a different way. We were going to give the young guys a chance.
This was, I guess, Russo's just gone. And then I guess you take over, or does Nash take over as the head booker?
I took over then. I took over.
So what was the talk, or what did they say? Like, hey, Russo's gone, you're in. Like what was said to you?
Yeah, well, they came, and I think they wanted JJ and Bill Bush wanted someone to kind of oversee Russo like Vince did. And he didn't want that. And I understand his position. And he stepped down and they put me back there. Kevin and I talked about it. I said, Kevin, I'd like you to be involved. Right then, he had other things. He was doing movies and such. So that's how I ended up with it.
So as far as WCW Sold Out, this is from January 16th, 2000 from Cincinnati, Ohio at the First Star Center. The attendance was a very paltry 14,132. The pay-per-view buys was only 115,000 buys, so it was down big time. The Starrcade 99, which was the pay-per-view before, was 145,000 buys, so it's even down from the month earlier. What is your kind of first thoughts when I say 14,000 in attendance, which is a great number, but then the buys are only 115,000?
Well, obviously, we had turned off a bunch of people with, we had gone from pretty solid stuff to some pretty completely different, and the people weren't buying it. They weren't buying Viagra on a pole match, Rick getting buried in the desert. You didn't have to be a genius to understand what they were doing when they buried Rick in the desert. They've been trying to get rid of Ric Flair since 1989. He still steals the show when he appears. They just don't know where to drive the stake at Dracula's heart, I guess. So there was, hey, there's no book that says, turn to page 40 and we know what we're going to do. It's trial by effort. And sometimes we all see things differently. And we were on a course of kind of real believability. We had a real hot thing going there. We had great talent. And now was the time to interject some of this young talent that, hey, for the first time on top, they did a pretty good job.
Now, as far as the power structure, who was kind of in charge? We know Bischoff's gone for months. What's the power structure?
Bill Bush, JJ, Gary was the corporate side, Gary Juster, and then it would be me.
Interesting, though, with that kind of thing, is Bill Bush. You hear all these stories of, is he a wrestling guy at all, or is he not really a wrestling guy?
He was not a die-in-the-wool wrestling guy, but Bill knew. He was a fan, and he knew what was right and what was wrong, and he had JJ to lean on. And JJ is probably the most underrated guy in the history of our business. I mean, he was the head of talent relations in WWF. He was the head of talent relations WCW. JJ's been around the business forever. He was successful everywhere he went. He was without Dusty. Without JJ, as great as Dusty was, JJ was a very intricate part of Dusty's inner circle. When they were doing huge business in the Carolinas, it was JJ and Dusty. And when they were doing huge business, when Crockett first took over, it was JJ and Dusty. Dusty was the lead guy, but JJ was the guy he bounced things off of.
So when you're booking this show, is JJ your assistant booker, or is he helping
No,
in that matter?
no. I would go to James and say, James, this is what I got prepared, and I want you to take a look at it and see if there's any holes in it. And that was what James was very good at. Do you want to have that match before you have that angle, or do you want to do something else there, or maybe you've given too much time to that match and you better be prepared to cut some times as you get later in the show. He was very good with numbers. He was very good in foreseeing trouble in a show, meaning time. Time is, people don't understand how things can get away on a pay-per-view or even a live TV. If you start giving guys, we'll say, you're going out there for 7 minutes. Well, not really, because their entrance is 2.5 minutes. Now the guys are down to 4.5 minutes. You've told them 7. So now you get 10 minutes and you've lost 3 minutes off the first match. And it continues to go like that, usually. So you have to really tighten up, and the guys have to be aware that the referee, they had the earpiece, and you could tell the referee, they have to go home now. And most of the guys would understand that and go home. But JJ was very good with that.
He seems like he is definitely the guy that was, the detail guy. I know I've talked to him a lot of times. I used to do a show with him. He always talked about detail, but he just seems like that in general anyway. Very detail oriented guy. He knows what he's doing, just even as far as like working with him or working alongside him. He's always got very, everything is lined up.
JJ was a school teacher. He had that mind that he would put everything down. JJ, like you said, he had everything down for you. JJ would write everything out, give it to you, show you where the mistakes could be made. And because of that, it saved, and he did it for Kevin Nash too. JJ was very intricate in keeping the show on the right path.
For sure, definitely. Was Jody Hamilton still there at this point?
Yes,
He
Jody
was,
was
okay.
the gorilla position. Yeah.
So what's his role?
Jody was the one that JJ would talk to about the times, how we doing with the times. And Jody was very good at the times too, and they would work side by side. But JJ would be the guy that could see, well, you're giving these guys 7 minutes, but actually it's 4.5, and they're gonna can't have a 4.5 minute match, and you're gonna have to take some time off. And he relay that to Jody, and Jody would take a uh, minute and a half off of every, to keep the time running. Jody was very. There's another guy that doesn't get his recognition. Jody was very good at that job.
Who
It's
else
a
is at the Oh, I'm
what?
sorry. I was gonna say, who else is at the gorilla position with Jody?
Uh, we kind of left Jody by himself. I'd walk over. How we doing, Jody? How we doing for time? Well, we're running a bit short, but I'm going to make it up. 2 matches up here. You gave them 13. They can get it done in 14. I've talked to them already. Thank you. So everybody was, it was everybody was working with one another very good at that time.
Is there anybody else that we're not talking about that's like a big behind the scenes person that, coordinating and helping out, like producer wise? Like who was kind of in those positions?
Iron was very good. Iron was very good. I mean, Iron is a very talented guy, one of the greatest performers in the business, and a great mind. Any company that has Iron has a bonus for them. And Iron would give guys directions, and he would make sure they followed them. He was very good. It still is.
For sure, he's one of the best in front of and behind the camera for sure.
Right.
How was the like backstage atmosphere? How was the locker room at this point?
Well, we're going to see an insurrection that night and or the next day. It was somewhat tense because, all these guys that think they can book, it's easy to write things down on paper. And this is a different generation I'm talking about back then. You got to go in and tell a 6'9" muscle out guy that he's going to lose to a 5'7" guy. That's a hard sell.
Especially back then, yeah.
Yeah. Back
Different
then,
times.
different times, people could say no, It's like the famous quote from Scott Hall when he got to WCW. He said, I didn't know you could say no.
Wasn't used to it with Vince.
Yeah.
Now, as far as this show itself, 14,000 people in attendance, just to me, is like, wow, that's really, really good. Especially because last week we talked about NWO Sold Out 97, your hottest period, and it only drew about 5 or 6,000 people. So at this point, it's like, wow, I mean, for 99, for it being kind of the downturn of WCW, not bad attendance. I mean, really, really good attendance. So fans are still wanting to see WCW. They still believe in WCW a little bit.
Right. And the thing is, Cincinnati's not a huge metropolis. Do you know what I mean? So you're drawing really a hell of a crowd in Cincinnati and the surrounding areas. The closest town to its size is Knoxville. And that's 250 miles away, I believe.
I feel like that is a good wrestling crowd, but it's weird. It's like certain spurts, certain time periods, it was big and then down. It kind of goes up and down. I feel like it's not as big as anymore. But obviously, they used to have a developmental organization that wasn't that far from there. So I mean, it was somewhat of a hotbed at one period.
Well, it was a real hotbed. It was one of the big towns when Jim Barnett had multiple towns across the country. People don't understand this, that Jim didn't have territories per se. He had major towns. Jim ran from Vegas to Colorado Springs to Denver to Indianapolis, Detroit, Cincinnati, Lexington, Louisville, they're huge towns for Jim Barnett. And the guys that were working for Jim, they were in big towns every night, and that's when wrestling was hot, off in the late 50s, early mid 60s, off of the Chicago TV and the New York TV.
For this show in this time period with Russo, obviously he's gone. Those guys are probably they're not happy that he's gone, and maybe they're not happy that the quote unquote the old guard is back in. When that show, like before it starts, is there any sort of like you know feeling in the atmosphere? Is there any sort of kind of sense that okay, these guys are really going to just leave
No,
tomorrow? I mean,
no,
you know what I mean? Is there any kind of sense from you
no,
guys?
no, no, no. I mean, I put the belt on Benoit. He was nice enough to give it back the next day. But if he had taken that belt and left, we would have been in a world of shit.
Yep.
So we didn't expect it. No.
As far as like them doing that, none of them, like Eddie, Dean, Perry, none of them said they were unhappy that they're walking out. So it was just a shocker to everyone.
I think it was a shocker that they left because we were going to put the tag belts on. In Bob Mold's book, he talks about the next day on TV. It was booked that Malenko and Perry would win the uh, tag belts, and Eddie had been the cruiserweight champion and the U.S. champion at the same time. So
What did you think of Bob Mold? Speaking of him, what was he just a part of the writing team at that point?
he came in because he was a friend of Gary's, and he had been a big wrestling fan. But I also think, and this is just me, conspiracy theorist, he was friends with Meltzer, and they were getting bombarded by Meltzer at that time. So it was a way to maybe mend some fences using Bob. And Bob was a very bright guy.
And we know Terry Taylor was also a friend of David Meltzer at that point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Did anybody ever like say behind the scenes, like, "Hey Terry, come on, stop leaking stuff," or does anybody say that, or did they just totally ignore that kind of stuff?
Well, they knew what was going on, but they knew it was probably be denied. You know what I mean? So what can you do? I mean, if you know somebody's going to deny something to you, why even bother? You know,
Yep.
and
What did
especially at that time because he was so close to Russo.
What did you think about like the dirt sheets in general? Like as far as you, did they try to get any information from you? Or, like, did they
Never,
want you to leak stuff? No, never. Really?
never,
Wow.
no, no, never. I
I'm always
think they thought I was too old school.
Yeah, and I'm always curious. It's like, who do they like kind of think that they can get information from? You know what I mean? It's like Terry
Oh,
Taylor must have been friendly to them at one point. How did they go about it?
well, I think the guys called Dave because if you look at guys who are getting these rave reviews on their matches, and you and I would sit and look at the same match, and yeah, it was a good match, but it isn't a 3.5 star match. You know who's leaking. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It was an incestuous relationship between Dave and the guys.
For instance, Starcade 2000, they tried to blame Russo. He was gone at that point. Terry Taylor actually ended up booking that show. But it's interesting. But like a successful show, you booked it, and then you read that Terry Taylor says that he booked it. So it's just interesting. Like, and I know I told you that before, where it said he was like the head booker in '97 or something. I was like, what? He was never the head booker in '97. It was Kevin. So it's just funny the way some of the stuff gets leaked out and who's trying to take credit for what.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I'm past the point of even caring what guys want to take credit for or don't want to take credit for bad decisions. Hey, I didn't make every decision right, but I think I did a pretty fair job. And to argue with my contemporaries about things that 25 years or 20 years ago, it's pretty sad because, you got to live today. You're a big baseball fan, John. My motto is same as Satchel Paige. Don't look back, something may be gaining on you. You got to look forward. You can't look in the back and carry grudges and be pissed off at somebody and carry feuds. For what? For what? We're here for such a short time.
I totally agree. I'm right there with you. And as far as, WCW at this point, Bret Hart is the world champion, but he's injured. So really, the title needs to be held up. Jeff Jarrett for the United States Championship. Basically, the title needs to be held up. Jeff Jarrett is injured. So it's one of those things leading into this pay-per-view. And now you're retaking over the book. You have to throw everything out the window because two of the big main event guys are injured. What was that like? Was that a gut punch?
Yeah, but it also was for me that these guys that were stealing the show every night in the middle were going to finally get their chance. And, the funny thing is, the guys 25 years ago that were saying, well, I got to get my shot on top. I got to get my shot on top. The ones that are still working are on top, right? And they haven't given up their spot. You know what I mean? When you're in that spot and you're making a lot of money, it's kind of hard to give up that spot. And I think it's ironic that the guys that were 25 years ago talking about, I need to get my spot, the ones that are working are still on top. And we're still bringing back the legends. We're bringing back Hogan and Flair and Ron Simmons and whoever, So I wish back then that we had integrated better with the young guys. But there was that thing about money that was so separated the guys because the difference between a middle guy and a top guy was astronomical pay wise.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And even so, Goldberg now is back and getting a WWE World Championship match at the Royal Rumble.
Yeah. 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 Think about that.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I believe he's 54 now. He's getting a title shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they need stars. They need draws. So they need him to come in. They didn't have anybody else for Drew McIntyre to wrestle.
And the other one is, and he's doing a great job, Chris Jericho. How old's Chris?
50. Yep.
And he's doing a great job. So sometimes when you're over, you're just over. It's like I said to people before. You could have the best match on the card, tear it down. I'm talking about WWE. Tear it down, ba ba ba. Rock comes out, raises the eyebrows, pull the curtains down. The show's over. You know what I mean? Or Stone Cold comes out and says, "Hell yeah," pull the curtain down. When guys are over, they're over. There's guys that just put asses in seats and call it the it factor or whatever you want to call it. It's something that you can't explain. You can see it, but how does somebody get it? They just have it inside them.
No doubt about it. Goldberg's got that it factor. There's no doubt about that. And as far as him being hurt, he got hurt in between Starrcade and this event as well. Starrcade sold out because of basically punching his arm through
Yeah.
a glass window of a limo and split his arm wide open from it. He originally had a pipe in there. Somehow, when he went to hit it once, I guess he dropped it, fell out. So he said, "Screw it." He's just going to do it. And he broke it with his bare hand. Really, really, I guess, was mad at Scott Hall. What's the truth behind that? Was he really pissed at Scott Hall? Because it seems like he just snapped and decided, "Screw it. I don't care if I have this thing or not. I'm breaking this window."
Yeah, he was pissed at Scott. And, you know, Bill being, coming from a legitimate sport, football, he didn't understand the ribbing. And Scott was raised by one of the greatest ribbers of all times, Mr. Perfect. And Scott, a lot of times, most of the time, didn't do it maliciously, but Scott could deadpan that looked like it was malicious, and it wasn't. And Bill was very sensitive, and he worked very hard for that position, and he didn't like to take any, not criticism, but any critique, I think. And him and Scott just didn't get along at the time.
One of those things where it's like, wow, I can't believe like that was like how he got injured. It's like, crazy to one point, maybe stupid, some might say, like just to do that barehanded and smack your hand into a window and break it. But I guess he just snapped and was just so pissed. And yeah, obviously he's a big, strong, tough guy that he's like, screw this, I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
And with him also, he's kind of involved with the Bret Hart injury because kicks Brett in the head. Brett kind of blames that. Brett also went for a figure four on the floor, hit his head on the floor in that match. Then later on, he'd be working a match with Sid, hitting his head. And Terry Funk on a house show kind of hit his head. So he developed post concussion syndrome, which was just very, very bad at that point. And it really ended up ending his career, his pro wrestling career. I know he'd come back in WWE and do a couple matches, but his real prime career was ended by post concussion syndrome, and he blames Goldberg. What do you think about that injury?
You know, I know about the injury, but I never thought about it until I looked back what you said about the figure four around the post where he hit his head. I
Yep.
never thought about that one. I'll tell you, one of the worst injuries I ever got in my life was not similar, but it was like the same place. Uh, when I was working with Barry and Blackjack, I worked with Kendall one night in a tag match. Kendall won them. And I called for it. I said, turnbuckle me. I'm going to take a chest and give me a clothesline. And he hit me right in the back of the head. And I'll tell you what, I wasn't right for a few days. I'm pretty sure I had a concussion. But back in those days, you just kind of shook it off. But
Yep.
to this day, my neck bothers me. So that was a good analogy on you, where his head hit the floor and then his head hit the floor again with Sid. Uh, that doesn't help the constant get hit in the head. I think about the fighters and then pro fighters and Ali. If you look after he beat Foreman, he I don't think he had another. Uh, he had the stoppage with Frazier in the Thriller and Manila, where he took a severe beating. I don't think he ever had another knockout in the 6 or 7 fights he fought. I don't think he knocked anybody out, and you can see that he was getting slower. And I believe that Parkinson was brought on by the concussions.
I could see that. Yeah. It seems definitely plausible. The thing is with Brett, he definitely blamed Goldberg. He said the kick in the head, all this other stuff, but all that other stuff, I think, definitely played a part in it too. Because like you said, it's multiple things happening. And he keeps hitting his head over and over, even after the Goldberg match.
Right, right. It was not just one bad hit. It was a few of them in a row in close proximity in time.
How big of a loss do you think he was at that point? Because he's the champion, he's kind of the centerpiece. He really was getting the major push now that Hogan wasn't around.
It's hard to replace a guy like Bret Hart. I mean, come on, Bret's one of the greatest performers, in-ring performers of all times. Uh, that's a huge loss. And then Jarrett, another guy I don't think gets his due. Uh, so you lose the world champion and the U.S. champion. You got a big hole.
That was bad because you think like, okay, you lose Brad, he's the world champ. Maybe the U.S. champ steps up. Then the U.S. champ gets hurt and he's out. They said it was from the Benoit diving headbutt, but it looks like it's really from Jimmy Snuka when Snuka may have landed on his head when he came in. It could be, or it could be both.
It could be both, but I'll tell you what, I have taken the Jimmy Snuka dive. And what if you look back at Jarrett, if you see when Jimmy lands, the boards come up too. And I remember when Jimmy used to dive, you'd have to sit up, to take the brunt. And the boards came up and hit me in the head. So I think, it might have been a little bit of both, but I think the Snuka thing was the one that started it for Jeff.
And another killer, just for me, was it was going to be the best of three, Jarrett versus Benoit, which has been awesome. Those two have great chemistry, had a great match at Starrcade. Benoit, obviously, we talked about it a million times, arguably the greatest worker of all time. Jarrett can hold his own against anybody, great worker. It was going to be a Dungeon Rules match, a bunkhouse match, and then the cage match called Cage Heat. So you lose all three of those matches with those two, which would have been an epic series of matches. So you lose a big feud to throw in there as well.
Right, right. So maybe the buy rate wasn't that bad,
Considering, yes.
Yeah.
I know I bought it. So, I know I was one of the people, one of the 115,000. So moving on to the actual show itself. So Billy Kidman is going to be kind of the one to fill in all three matches against three different opponents. Why Kidman getting the push? Why him? Why now?
Billy had worked hard. And I believed in repaying people that busted their ass. And Billy was a trooper and busted his ass. And he deserved it. It was his time. It was getting to be they couldn't hold these kids back anymore. It was their time.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know. With Kidman, I liked him, but I don't know. There was something missing. It could have been the promos. It could have been that's what's missing. But there was something about him that was, made him not be able to reach that main event level, not be able to reach the pinnacle, or not able to reach the top. It could be the promos. I'm not sure.
I'm going to go with what you said, the promos, but you got to realize who he's following. Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Hall, Six, Arn Anderson, Sting, and a host of others. Randy Savage. That's a hard act to follow, you know what I mean? And you don't come across like they do. You come across a little bit average, and those guys were way above average talkers.
For sure. And as far as him, I'm sure when Hogan makes the comment that he couldn't draw in the flea market, that does not help him and his credibility either.
No, no. And that was also one of the reasons to give Billy that push, because that was uncalled for, and the guy was a hard worker, and he didn't need to be demeaned like that.
Does anybody say anything to the Hulkster about it?
I think Eric went to the Hulk and said something, because when I was gone, didn't Billy have a series of matches with Hulk?
Yes. They have a
And
feud. Yep. Months
did
later.
he beat Hulk
Yep.
Hogan?
Yep.
Okay.
So Hogan kind of was like, all right. Maybe he kind of thought it was maybe a dickhead comment.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And to do, when I said to you, didn't Billy Kidman beat Hulk Hogan? You had to think for a second. That's how insignificant it was.
Yeah. Yep. Meant nothing. Yep.
Yeah, it was the wrong thing to do.
Yes. And I mean, you could work the match, and the matches were fine because of the size difference.
Yeah.
But when you're Hogan, you have the size difference plus who he is. And, he's
Right.
like the Babe Ruth with the wrestling. Then he loses to Kidman, who was, kind of floundering in the mid card, upper mid card. Like, to me, it didn't register.
No, it didn't register, and it didn't register to the fans. I mean, put it this way. Would they have done that to The Rock or Austin?
Right. Probably not.
No.
As far as the actual show itself, The first matchup, Billy Kidman defeats Dean Malenko in a catch-as-catch-can match. And I believe we mentioned this one time before when we were kind of talking about leading up to the show, but it was basically a big mistake,
for
you know,
Dean.
for Dean. Yeah, he snuck out of the ring, and the whole thing was that in the this dungeon rules catch-as-catch-can match, you can't leave the ring. You're supposed to stay in the ring. Was that just a mistake?
Yes,
True
I'm giving
mistake, or did he do it because he was leaving? He didn't want to lose.
uh, I'm giving Dean the benefit of the doubt because Billy and him were friends. I'm giving the benefit of the doubt.
The thing was with that is it was just like such a mistake. Could they have restarted the match and just done it over? Or you think that the rules are the rules, you can't go
It-
against the rules?
my thing is the rules are the rules. If you don't lift your shoulder up on a 3 count, you're out. In my book, you're out. If you can't, you know, I think it was a brain fart with Dean, and I always give the wrestler the benefit of the doubt. I don't think most guys go out and do something like that on purpose. I'm giving Dean the benefit of the doubt that it was a true mistake.
If it was restarted, it would have kind of just been
Killed it. Killed it.
a
You could never have that match again.
good point.
Yeah.
Yep. The next matchup, which originally, for some reason, was supposed to be Vampiro and a mystery partner against David Flair and Crowbar. But this match is a handicap match as Vampiro defeats David Flair and Crowbar with Daphne. Was there something like a miss here? Was somebody supposed to be his partner they didn't show, or something happened?
Yeah. We were going to, the best of my recollection, we were going to bring somebody in from Mexico. And we would have this problem once in a while where the visas would get hung up. And I forget who it was, but it was a Hispanic guy. I'm not sure if it was the son of El Santo or somebody that meant something down there. And we were trying to, because Vampiro, that's where he made his name, was Mexico. And I think that's what happened, the best of my recollection.
And he gets the win over Flair and Crowbar. Was Vampiro set to get a big push at this point?
Yes. Yes. I mean, he was getting over.
What did you like about him?
I thought he had a unique look, and you got to look at a guy's track record. Here was an American that went to Mexico and drew a lot of money. And to go to Mexico and be an American and draw money is very difficult. Art Bar and Eddie did it. Uh, Vampiro did it. Conan, who's a Hispanic, did it, but he had, being part Cuban, part Puerto Rican, I believe. He spoke Spanish perfectly. It was a little easier in the way Conan looked, but not many guys went to Mexico and got over that weren't from Mexico.
Yeah, Vampiro Canadiense, the Canadian vampire. He just had a cool look to him. The face paint, obviously, he's tall and athletic and big, so he even looked cool just as far as the way he carried himself. He definitely was a guy I was interested in and wanted to see get a push. And obviously, he was kind of the part of the young guys, or the youth movement in WCW.
Right, right. And he did look cool, and he was. He was everything you said, John.
And athletic as hell for a big guy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And we've talked about Crowbar before. I mean, we love Crowbar. What did you think about David Flair? It's funny because Rick, it might be one of the best athletes just as far as what he can do in the ring. Amazing. Charlotte Flair, amazing athlete. And everything you hear about Reed was that he was such a great athlete, kicked ass in amateur wrestling stuff. Seemed like David Flair. I know we're talking about different mothers here because Charlotte and Reed have different mothers than David. But how come David? It didn't quite click with him.
I think that the difference was Charlotte and Reed were around Rick. Rick got divorced early in David's life, so he wasn't around them as much. So he never got the chance to probably work in the rings early as a kid. And he kind of started too late. I think there was a lot of pressure on him being Ric Flair's son. I mean, you go back in sports, a lot of juniors don't make it, do they? Trying to
Yes, you're
follow
right.
their father's footsteps, whether it be baseball, football, basketball. So, I mean, even boxing, Marvin Frazier, right? Joe's kid.
Hmm.
They pushed him for about 10 fights, then he got annihilated, and that was it. I mean, just because you come from the family, your upbringing's different too. You know what I mean? It's a different. I think David tried very, very hard, and he's very successful today. So life worked out for David.
And I feel like with Charlotte, she's almost lucky she's female because it's almost judged differently. Because if you're the greatest of all time son, they almost think, you're going to like, I mean, that's insane. Like the pressure and like, oh, you got to be like Rick. He was the best ever. You know what I mean? That's hard to do.
Yep.
As far as David Flair, we've talked about this before. He was a great ratings getter. So him himself was great to have on TV. He just wasn't a great worker.
Right. Hey, John, can you edit a spot? I'm going to lose power pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Can we kind of breeze through it?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about this.
Yeah, no problem. So the next matchup, Big Vito and Johnny the Bull, aka the Mamalukes, defeat the Harris brothers in about 10 minutes. Fan of the Mamalukes?
Me?
Yeah.
No, that was Russo's thing. I don't like the great people, the Mamalukes. You know, uh, you know, it's like, really, in this day and age, there's an Italian defamation league, right? I'm sure
Right.
there's a Polish defamation league. There's an Irish defamation league if they know how to spell it. You know, uh, you can't do that kind of thing. Even back then, I don't like that kind of stuff. That's just
Oh,
me personally.
the next match, Oklahoma defeats Medusa in a singles match for the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. A very jokey kind of thing, but Oklahoma was the character Ed Ferrara played, making fun of Jim Ross. What'd you think about Oklahoma?
Hated it. Hated it. Hated it. Jim Ross is one of the top two announcers of all times, or top three. I mean, he gets a disease, and we make fun of a guy with an affliction who's an asset to the business, and they think that's funny. They think that's cute. They should get it. I mean, Jim did a lot to overcome, and he's still doing a hell of a job. Those guys, and Ed should have known better.
Yeah, and Vince, I just talked to Vince about it. He said that's his biggest regret in wrestling. Hated making fun of JR. He said every time he talks to JR, he apologizes to him for it. So now he's looking back, he hates it. So, at least, they didn't like it, but apparently Vince McMahon loved it because Ed used to do it for Vince. So,
Well,
I mean, you know how Vince is.
yeah, I'm just against anything with anybody with any kind of handicap to make fun of. I hate that kind of stuff.
Yes. The next matchup, Brian Knobbs, who is the hardcore champion, defeats Fit Finley, Norman Smiley, and Ming in a four-way match. What do you think about the WCW hardcore division?
It was good for those guys. I mean, the Nasty Boys are hardcore guys.
Yep.
Ming, it's a different thing. And Fit Finley's one of the greatest workers of all times. I didn't like Fit being in there, but he was in there when I took over, and they did a pretty good job.
Yeah, absolutely. Billy Kidman in the next match in a bunkhouse brawl defeats Perry Saturn. So the two guys, Malenko and Saturn, who are going to be on their way out, both lose to Billy Kidman.
Yeah, yeah. And they're Billy was in that kind of clique with those guys. So it worked out too, because in the end of the night, they were going to succeed.
Yes. Booker T with Midnight defeats Stevie Ray by DQ in about 6 minutes. What do you think about the Harlem Heat feuding?
I'm not big on brothers fighting one another. The only one that really made sense to me was Dusty's Boys. That was a story that worked. I don't like. I mean, if hey, you fight with your, I get brothers. Yeah, hey, you fight with your brother when you're a kid. You're not going to fight with them and get paid for it. You know, we used to have a lot of Christmas where there'd be fence fights and Sullivan and
Mm-hmm.
Thanksgivings, but you're not going to go out and get paid for it. I don't like that. That's just me.
Next matchup, Tank Abbott defeats Jerry Flynn in about a minute, 30 seconds. Kind of just a nothing match, really, probably just to get Tank over, really. The next match, Buff Bagwell defeats Diamond Dallas Page in a last man standing match. It seems like Buff's getting a little bit of a push here.
Yeah, because I've said this before. Buff, why he didn't become the star in New York is beyond me. We've all heard different sides of the story, but Buff, very few guys in the business looked as good as Buff. Very few guys in the business had the charisma that Buff did, and very few people. Buff was a very solid performer, could work with anybody, and he
Definitely.
was the right size.
Totally agree. Something didn't click with him as far as getting to that next level, but he had all the tools. He definitely could have gotten there.
Right, right.
The next matchup is the third and final match in that series for Billy Kidman. The Wall with Shane Douglas defeats him in a cage match in about 5+ minutes. But that's one of the things where he already wrestled twice. The Wall is 3 times his size. You got Shane Douglas out there too. So is that just one of those things he loses, but he doesn't really lose anything?
Right. He's not going to, and here's the thing. Nobody thought Billy was going to win the first one or second one. And now everybody thinks we're going to put him over the third one. To me, it's a swerve. People go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. He wrestled, like you said, 3 times. He's against the Wall, who was a terrific performer. You got Shane on the floor. Things worked out and worked out well, I thought, of that.
Definitely. The next matchup, Kevin Nash defeats Terry Funk in a hardcore match where the winner gets the position of WCW commissioner. So the commissionership is at stake. Nash gets the win here. What do you think about this? Bringing back, obviously, Terry Funk, putting him in a meaningful feud, having him fight for the commissionership, one point being the commissioner. Nash beats him for it.
You can bring Terry Funk back today and he means something. Terry Funk, to me, is the most beloved guy in the wrestling business ever. I mean, everybody's a mark for Terry Funk in the wrestling business, me included. Uh, Terry's a draw. Terry can work, and him and Nash did a great job, I thought.
Did you like that feud?
Yes, because Terry brings out the best in guys when you work with Terry. Because Terry lets you know he's there in the ring, and it's not a walk in the park. You better lace your boots up tight when you work with Terry. And Kevin responded, worked with Terry very well, I thought. I thought it went well.
Definitely. Good stuff as far as that match is concerned. The main event of the evening, Chris Benoit defeats Sid Vicious for the vacated WCW title by submission with his foot under the rope. So he's now the WCW World Heavyweight Champion. Arn Anderson served as guest referee for the match. Just the thought, obviously, the foot's under the rope as an excuse just in case something happens, or Sid wanted the foot under the rope as an excuse.
No, we went over the finish. We got up and left the room, and all of a sudden something hit me. I said, "What if?" And I went back and I said to Sid, "Stick your foot a little under the ropes." And he said, "Okay." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, it gives you an out. We can have rematches." Little did I know.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Little did you know that the next night they were going to walk out. So were you completely shocked, or was there a part of you that was thinking that it could happen?
I was completely shocked, but something hit me that uh, I think it might have been too that Sid was gracious about doing the job. He said, "I don't think this is the right thing to do, but if you want me to do it, I'll do it." And I thought, well, yeah. And then when I started to leave, and it was just me and Sid, I turned back and said, "I got to give this guy an out. He's tapping out, and in case we could have some rematches." And lo and behold, you get the wish of work for me at the time.
Yeah, it's one of those things where Orange says the next night he missed it. The foot was under the rope. That really, if you look at it, Sid didn't really lose. He tapped out because he was still foot was under the rope, so it wasn't out. You're right, it wasn't out for Sid for sure.
Right, right.
I feel like also Sid didn't want to lose to Benoit because he was smaller, but Benoit's such a good worker. He was believable as the champion. You were trying to get Benoit over despite all your problems with him. Is that one of those things where it's like, man, you did everything you could on your end to try to mend the fences and make sure he didn't go anywhere?
I think one of the things that David Penzer said to me, he said, "You extended the olive branch as far as you could have." And I did to all of them, and like in Bob Bowles' book, they were going to win the tag team championships the next night. So I did everything I could that was going to be right for business. They did everything that was right for them because they all became. Perry had a good run. Dean became a great producer. Uh, Eddie and Chris became the world heavyweight champions in a big man's territory. So everything worked out for everybody, I think.
It was one of those things where it's like maybe Sid losing could have led to some rematches because the foot was under the rope, so it kind of worked out. But Benoit leaving left the door open for Sid. Eventually, really, he ends up defeating the Harris boys, and he defeats Nash, and he becomes the champion for real. So it's one of those things where you kind of left the door open where, yeah, he might have to work a little bit harder to get it, but he's still technically never lost, so he's really the champion. Because WCW never said Benoit was the champ; they never technically recognized him as champion.
Right, right. So we were lucky there. We were lucky it wasn't a week later.
Losing those guys was huge, though. I mean, that was a huge
Huge.
loss.
It was we had hit the iceberg, but losing them was we were scraping and the bow was coming off. It was a huge loss. You can't replace that. You know.
Especially if you guys were going into like a youth movement, you need those four guys that are awesome that are probably going to have the best match on the card of the night, no matter what. I mean, Benoit's one of the best. Malenko obviously is great. Eddie, one of the best. Perry Saturn was great. So you're losing four guys that are having possibly, if they're in four different matches, the four best matches on the card.
Yeah, you can't replace that. We lost something we couldn't replace. They're fabulous, fabulous. I mean, like you said, they had the four best matches on the card. And the neat thing about them, everybody among the four of them tried to have the best match and tried to outdo each other, and they cheered each other on. It was pretty cool to see.
And if you go back into our archives, we have an episode about the Radicals where we cover this in even more detail about them leaving, them going to the WWF, all that stuff. So it's Malenko, Eddie, Perry, and Chris Benoit leaving. That's the Radicals episode of Taskmaster Talks. We actually also have an episode completely dedicated to Chris Benoit as well, where we go into detail over obviously Chris and Kevin's relationship or lack thereof, and their feud and everything else. So we go even more in depth. That's why we're not going to go too far in depth here. And also because Kevin has no power and is
Yeah,
losing power over there as well. But just wanted to, of course, mention Benoit and Sid and that whole situation, that whole scenario, because it's such a big part of WCW. And it's such one of those things, like you said, the Titanic is sinking. It's boom, it's going to even sink even further when you lose four of your top guys and they go to WWF when WWF was on top but needed star power because Undertaker was injured and Steve Austin was injured. So those guys got plugged in right away and really helped WWF further sink WCW.
right. Well,
So as far as some plugs, Kevin, just want to mention you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Two Man Power Trip. Check out my website, tmptempire.com. You can follow Kevin on Instagram at Taskmaster Talks. Go to prowrestlingtees.com and get a Kevin Sullivan shirt. There's a couple of them on there. Very cool. You can also go to doublehell.com, and that is Double Hell Wrestling t-shirts. There's a whole array of Kevin Sullivan shirts on there that I implore you to get. Really kind of cool stuff over there. Kevin, what else you got going on?
February 7th, I'm going to Dallas, Texas for Southwest Fury taping. There will be Mark Henry, Teddy Long, Charlie Haas, Andrew Anderson, Tim Storm, and a host of others. So,
And you mentioned Terry Funk. We're talking about Terry Funk. He's back.
yes, he's coming to I believe it's the 27th to Southwest Entertainment Fury. So, glad to see Terry back in action.
That's pretty cool. I mean, you think like, oh, he's gone, he's retired. No, he's back, and there's been a bit of buzz about it too because it's Terry Funk coming back. So there's some buzz about it for SWE Fury for sure.
Yep. So thank you, John, and thank you to our fans, and thank you for understanding that I'm losing power as we speak.
Yes, yes. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us this week. We'll see you right back here next week on Taskmaster Talks with Kevin Sullivan. See you next week, folks.